Thanks for staying with us. Now, referencing an article by Saluddin Latif, dwindling economy is otherwise known as depression economy or economy depression interchangeably, and or recess economy. It is an occurrence wherein an economy is in a state of financial turmoil, often the result of a period of negative activities based on the country's gross domestic product rate. However, this has become a global phenomenon. A good example of necessitating factor is the global oil crash market and the pandemic virus, as the COVID-19 ravaging the human race. That has conjointly led to the decline in the GDP growth per capita of a country, which forces degradation in the performances of the economic sectors, retrenchment of staff, and wrapping up of industries. It is a lot worse than a recession, with GDP falling significantly and lasts of periods of time. Now, ultimately, Nigeria has been in deteriorating financial state for years. Her economy in the last few years has been going through some turbulence. A country that has recorded an average GDP growth of 6.5%, one of the highest in the world, less than a decade ago, is now projected to grow at 2.3% in 2016. Now, breaking it down, we are asking what went wrong, what's happening first of all with our economy, what went wrong, and what can we do, going forward, to really help the economy. Is it a factor of truly one human being, like people are accusing our president, that it is him that has brought this bad economy to us? Now, please, let's hear what you have to say. Remember, you can join the conversation. Send us an SMS or WhatsApp to 081-803-4663. You can also tweet at us at WaitShowAfrica1 with the hashtag WaitShow. All right, so Uti, I just want to hear your thoughts on this economic matter, because we had, you were not on the show. It was myself and Manny, right? We had what's his name, David Hudeni, and he was really giving, that day was a back-to-back jab with President Buhari.
Slaughtering the government.
slaughtering President Buhari, saying that it is his economy, it is his presidency landed Nigeria where it is today. But do you think it's really in the hands of one man where our economy is right now in Nigeria? Because it's really bad. We've not had it this bad. It's really bad. A lot of things that you could really play with around. Now you can't play with cash too much like that, because you are calculating every kobo, every second that is coming to you. People do not have those kind of loose cash that they had, before. So do you think it's really tied to this government?
Well, this government certainly hasn't helped.
Well,
let me put it that way. I don't know that we can lay it entirely at the feet of this government, because there's several factors for me that I see that are impacting our reality today. So there, oil in itself, the dependencies we have on oil, the war, the Russia-Ukraine, even though that's a new situation, COVID, FX, which is also tied to some of these things as well. So there are lots of factors, but I think that where I see for me that there's a gap is that we don't have, how should I put it now? We don't have policies in place, right, that will make life easier for us. Our fiscal policies are not helping matters. I still struggle, and I understand that, yes, there was a problem in the FX space, in the BDC space, but to yank certain things, like we were talking yesterday about the Okada ban, some of the measures that our governments put in place, sometimes they're so unimaginative. That's the only word I can use. And sometimes they create bigger problems. So you're trying to fix a small problem, and then you create a whomping, massive, bigger problem that then does more to stifle the economy than it can to actually fix the problem, than the impact of the problem you were trying to fix.
Absolutely.
So in that sense, that for me is where I see the true problem, where it didn't start today. The effects of corruption didn't start today. The stealing of money didn't start today. The infrastructure projects and the things that could have, impacted the economy positively, all of those things didn't start in this administration. So in that sense, it's like a snowball. Once it starts rolling, it keeps getting bigger and bigger. So if people just leave it and it keeps going, and you don't do anything to stop it from rolling, it's just going to get bigger, and that's where we are.
Manny, you agree?
I agree. There's something I saw today. I'm just going to quickly read it before I give my opinion. It says, God, please, one thing I pray today is for you to give me grace to stop reading about Nigeria. Just give me my daily bread, forgive my trespasses, and lead me not into temptation. That's all, before person go run mad. So for me, I think it's like every day one problem. And when you look at it, really, we are a nation in great distress, like great distress. We have been, for the past 6 years, our growth has been stagnant. And we've only grown, like at a rate of 1% cumulatively, at the rate of 1%. And that's not a good number. We are actually seriously struggling as a nation. And we're struggling as a nation and barely able to live up to our title as Africa's economic giant. You understand? So when you talk about being Africa's giant, right now it's only in population. And even a large majority of this population are living unemployed, in poverty, and guess what? Very bitter. Very, very bitter. I was talking to somebody yesterday about this whole Okada thing happening. We've been seeing a lot of videos on the internet about different religions fighting and destroying property. When I looked at it, I was like, what would make someone, because I watched a video today and they opened a shop and it was a clothing shop, and when they opened it, I just gasped. I was like, oh my God, they packed everything. This is somebody's sweat. So I just started thinking, like, what would make human beings do this to another person, another human? People are bitter. And the economy they're just directing their bitterness, frustration at the wrong people. Not at the government.
Your fellow. But that's the powder keg that we've always said that we're sitting over there, closer to the middle class than to anybody else.
Thank you.
Yeah.
True.
Let me bring in our guest. So Bamidele Adewole is an experienced investment advisor, consultant, and personal finance coach with vast corporate experience in investment, research and advisory, investment banking, financial strategy, financial analysis, stockbroking, investor relation, real estate advisory, sales, business valuation, and business development. He runs a real estate investment and development company called PWAN Stars, based in Lagos, Nigeria. He is a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria and also an associate of the Chartered Institute of Stockbrokers, Chartered Institute of Taxation, and Chartered Institute for Securities and Investment in the UK. He's also a member of the Securities and Exchange Commission in Nigeria and an authorized dealing clerk of the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Okay, that was a lot. Thank you so much. He's a friend of our house, might I add, right? Thank you so much, Bamidele, for joining us tonight. So you heard us talking our ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. You see this economic matter, I don't have anything to say, but I want us to have this conversation and try to break down so that maybe the average person watching today would understand that, okay, this thing is beyond one person, because I just do not want to believe that one person has the capacity to run down an entire nation's economy. I want to believe that it's not possible for one person to run down an economy. Maybe there are other factors that would have contributed. And it just so happened that it is under this person's leadership. So maybe you help us break it down. What is happening to our economy today as it stands?
Okay, well, I think you've sort of, in a way, answered the question, really, because you've put a bit of context to it. But let me add a little bit more to what you've said. Now, let's paint a scenario of, assuming you run a company, right? Let's call it ABC Company. Now, that company is going to experience volatility in terms of revenue and in terms of profitability. It's inevitable. Now, what causes that volatility? Yeah, essentially two things. Two buckets. First is what we call systemic risk factors, and then second is what we call unsystemic risk factors. So what are let me start with unsystemic risk factors are factors that are within the control of management. So things like insubordination, things like bad leadership, things like strategic risk, that's the leaders making wrong decisions and all of that. All of that falls under unsystemic risk. But then you also have the systemic risk factors. What are those systemic risk factors? Obviously things like government policy. They're called systemic because they affect the entire system. and the management of that company does not have control, either directly or indirectly, over those factors. Things like adverse weather. For instance, you're into agro-allied, you're an agro-allied business. If the weather is not favorable, it's going to affect your business. Even those of us who are into real estate, there are certain things you can't do during the rainy season. Yeah. It affects our business. So there are lots of things. The global economy is a systemic risk factor that not just affects companies, it also affects countries. Okay? So to now answer your question directly, right, the same thing applies to Nigeria. Whether you want to blame the president or you want to blame the ministers or you want to blame the governors, whoever, the fact still remains that the challenges that the country faces falls within those two general buckets. You have the systemic and the unsystemic. What are the unsystemic factors? Obviously, things like corruption is unsystemic because it's something that ideally should be within the control of the government. Okay, things like mismanagement of public funds, embezzlement, things like that. They're all unsystemic. But then you have the systemic, which unfortunately, in the last 6 to 7 years has been significant. Significant. You had the issues in 2016. Okay, we've had the issues in 2020 with COVID and obviously
2016 was the fall of the oil price,
yes,
right?
There were two things that caused the issues in 2016. The first issue was there was what we call an oil glut in the US. So there was a production boom. Yeah. There was so much excessive supply of oil in the US. And in fact, it was in 2016 that the US became the largest producer of oil globally. Okay? Now, what that then means is that you had a case where you have excess supply over,
the demand.
Demand. Now, there were two things. Supply increased, then demand also decreased. Why did demand decrease? Because there was an issue in China. China faced a sort of, what's it called? Like a bubble that burst, sort of, in China. The global, the stock market in China crashed, literally. Okay, and that affected the financial markets and it affected demand.
Their demands, yes.
Yeah, demand and all of that. So that obviously had an impact on demand for everything, including demand for oil. So that, obviously, when you have low demand and high supply, prices would inevitably crash. So that is what led to the crash of the oil prices in 2016, and obviously dovetailed into the recession that we had in Nigeria. Okay, so that's what happened. So contrary to what a lot of people think that, it was Buhari that still killed, no, it wasn't. There were certain factors that led to those problems that we had in 2016. Of course, we've also mentioned 2020 with COVID and everything. All of those factors are what I'll call systemic. They're all systemic. But then that does not rule out the fact that the country itself has not been complicit. Of course, there are certain things we could have done better than we did to have avoided or to at least have mitigated the risk factors that we experienced.
So do you have a question? Because I wanted to quickly touch on something. You mentioned the unsystemic risk, what do you call the factors?
Yes.
In Nigeria, do you think that if we are tidied up that the unsystemic,
exactly,
what do you call it again?
Unsystemic risk factors.
Risk factors.
Yes.
Do you think if that was nipped, like properly tidied up, even though there was a systemic risk factor, like the ones that we couldn't control, correct, right? The COVID, the drop or the excess boom or whatever in the climate change and all of that. Do you think that would have at least the impact would have been as bad as we have it today? Would it, if probably corruption was out of the picture, so many things were out of the picture, which is why people would continue to blame Buhari, because the mandate he came with was that there was not going to be any corruption. But Absolutely. It seemed like it even boomed. I mean, yesterday we took a story. Accountant General, what did they call the man? 80 billion. Do you understand? Somebody just sit down and embezzled such an amount of money under a government that is supposedly supposed to be an anti-corruption government. Do you understand?
Yes.
Do you think maybe if that unsystemic risk factor was tidied up, would not have had as much impact as when the systemic problems came in?
Yes, I agree with you, absolutely. That's exactly what would have happened. Now, even if we had controlled corruption, even if we had better leadership, we would still have had problems. We would still have had a recession. The only difference is that it wouldn't have been as bad as it was. Okay, now let's take an example. we've had refineries that have not been working for the past maybe 2 decades, right? If those refineries had been working during the periods when we had that oil crash, right, we would have at least have been able to cope a lot better. Because now we're not so much depending on the US, importing refined petrol from the US, because we can produce locally and also sell locally. So we are more self-dependent. One of the challenges that we face as a country is that we are so dependent on the global economy. So whatever happens in China, whatever happens in the US, it affects us significantly. So we're a very fragile economy. That's the problem. And the reason we're fragile is because we do not have the capacity to be self-reliant. So yes, absolutely, if we had refineries that were working, and that's why I'm quite excited that we're going to have a Dangote refinery coming on board, and then maybe a BWA coming on board maybe in the next 1 or 2 years, that would significantly help. At least, even if it doesn't help anything, it will help our FX. But yes, if we had tidied up on some of those things, it would have helped significantly, but would have still
it would not have been this bad. Okay, let us quickly take a break, and I'll come to Uti and Mani. I'm sure they have questions. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Thanks for staying with us. Now, if you just tuned in, we're having already an amazing chat with Bamidele Adewole on understanding the Nigerian economy. We're asking what went wrong and what's the way forward. Now, please, let's hear what you have to say. Remember, you can join this conversation. Send us an SMS or WhatsApp to 081-803-84663. You can also tweet at us at WadeShowAfrica1 with the hashtag WadeShow. So, Uti, you had a question.
Yeah, so, I mean, I like that you ended the last statement on FX. Now, at least 3 or 4 people have said to me today, when you say, how are you? They say, well, dollar is 600 naira. So you just talked about our dependence on the global economy. So the fact that a foreign currency becomes part of your daily greeting shows how important it is to us.
Absolutely.
And we've talked on the show before about, I think it was a government official, I can't remember who, that was saying we need to buy Nigerian. So exactly.
Vice President.
So it is clear that FX is a huge part of our economy. We're largely dependent on a lot of things in terms of import. So even if we say we're producing in Nigeria, most of the raw materials are still imported. So I just want you to talk a bit about that FX. We hear these numbers just growing, and I'm like, how did we get from 150 to 600 in a matter of a few years? I mean, it just, what is it? What went wrong?
Yeah, what went wrong was essentially a failure in the system. See, there are 2 things that affect FX, right? There's the monetary policy side, and then there's obviously the fiscal policy, right? Now, you could use monetary policy to temporarily manage your FX, right? Interplay of CBN actions, inflation rate, and all of those things. You could manage your FX, and that's what the previous CBN governor did to a very large extent. He tried to use a bit of fiscal policy, but he's limited because he's a CBN governor, so he can only work on monetary policy, right? But then the fact still remains that if you do not sort out the fundamentals of the economy, the FX would always suffer. You understand what I'm saying? So if you don't have infrastructure in place, you would have problems with FX. Eventually, no matter the kind of padding you try to do with your currency, if you don't encourage local production, you understand, if unemployment keeps rising, if you have insecurity in the system, there would always be problems. Your FX would continue to fall. So the fact that, in my own opinion, as it is now, I'm sorry to say, but I don't see the situation improving in the short term until we get to the point where we're able to sort out fiscal issues. The real sector is thriving. The non-oil sector and the oil sector as well is booming, right? All of those things would have an effect on currency eventually, and then we begin to see the currency improving. But as it is now, there's only one way, there's only one direction that the FX is going to go to, and that's down. It doesn't seem very good, unfortunately.
I guess maybe just to follow up quickly on that, because we are dependent today on it almost seems like our singular source of FX is oil.
Yes.
So when you talked about the non-oil exports, this was something we used to have in the past.
Correct.
So today, even as much as we're saying buy Nigerian, are we really, because I know this administration in particular has been a huge proponent of agriculture, of the whole agro-allied chain.
Yes.
So are we actually making any progress in that space?
You know, that's why I mentioned going back to the basics. Because if you want to solve a problem, you have to tackle that problem from the source. Now, why are we not producing the way we are supposed to be producing? Take agric, for instance. Why is the agric sector not thriving? Agric is supposed to be the largest employer of labor in the country. It is the largest, it still is the largest employer. But it's suffering. Why? Because there's insecurity. So if you say you want to start tackling FX, right, through all sorts of financial gymnastics and all of that, and you have not sorted out security, you're wasting your time. So you have to go to the source. Tackle the insecurity problem. Let farmers go back to their farms.
So that means, from what you are saying, it is safe to say that truly somebody was right about the current administration. Because yes, we've had cases of insecurity in the past, but it is not this bad that people cannot comfortably drive on the road without the fear of being kidnapped or being robbed. You know, do you understand my point? So it means that it is actually safe to say that this administration, in terms of what's it called, the economy, they are the cause of the problem that we are in. But let me come to money, because I don't have.
You know, like what you're just saying now, I asked the question when you talked about the Okada ban. I said, what happens to these Okada riders?
Yes.
So if you're talking about a case of insecurity, it's growing daily because we are not doing anything to stop issues. How can you ban the Okada and you have nothing for them? Those people have families. So what next? They're going to take to kidnapping. They're going to take to robbery. So what are you going to do about that as a government? So what I see here is we recycle our problems. If it's not this today, it's this tomorrow. One day, one problem. In the 70s and in the 80s, we had a lot of factories, you know, producing a lot of things here. We had even car factories or car
assembly plants,
assembling parts here, and now they're no more.
No, but I hear Peugeot has been revived in Kaduna State. I also hear that the textile companies in Kaduna State also have been revived.
That's very good.
Yes.
So what can we do now to attract more of this? If we have these two people here, so maybe we need to find out why are they here, why are they in Kaduna, and what do we do to attract more of these investors?
I think we need to, as much as possible, parley with the private sector. I think we should get the private sector more involved, because clearly the government doesn't have the capacity to do these things themselves.
I don't even think the government is supposed to do everything.
The government isn't supposed to do everything. As far as I'm concerned, as an emerging economy, or should I say frontier economy, that Nigeria is, I think what the government should be focusing on more is regulation. Just provide oversight sort of functions and all of that, but then let the private sector come and drive the economy. Because I'm sure there are quite a lot of entrepreneurs out there who can revive the textile industry, for instance. There are people who are willing to do it. All they just need is just the support. They need the enabling environment. So the government should just take a step back and allow the private sector come in, right, and then drive this. We're already seeing it in the oil sector with Dangote refinery and all of that. But we need to do it a whole lot more.
But I read somewhere yesterday about Dangote needing $1 billion, that he does not have enough oil. He needs $1.1 billion to complete the refinery.
Dangote.
So, I read it somewhere.
There goes another Nigerian issue.
Wait.
You start something and you don't finish it.
May you wait first. So the question I want to ask you is that when you say that the government should create an enabling environment for businesses to thrive, what are so let's break down what enabling environment would mean for businesses. You understand? Is it that they are providing the security architecture? What exactly are they providing?
Or the
funding? Or what is that enabling environment?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said funding, because obviously funding is critical. If you don't have funding, and when I say funding, I'm talking of affordable funding, because there are different types. There's cheap funding and there's expensive funding. So part of what Sanusi did when he was CBN governor was he tried to create intervention funds for critical sectors like the Power and Innovation Fund, the Agric Sector Fund, and all of that. So that's what we need to see more happen. Real estate, for instance, I'm into real estate, and I can tell you one of the things that is really killing our industry is the fact that a lot of entrepreneurs do not have access to funding, or those who have access to funding don't have access to affordable funding.
Very expensive.
Okay, so it's very expensive.
So what's the role of the Bank of Industry in all of this?
The Bank of Industry is an arm of the government, and they do not work in isolation or independent of the government. So the policy formulation still comes from the government. The Bank of Industry is just there to implement those reforms and those policies. So it has to come from the government. The Minister of Finance has to come up with certain reforms that would help the Bank of Industry support the real sector. So like I said, single-digit loans, for instance, for critical sectors is absolutely.
Do you think the country can afford to give single-digit loans? I mean, you're in the banking industry. You have to help me.
Affording to give single-digit loans. You talked about risk. I mean, NPLs is a very real risk. It can put a bank in the ground very quickly. Absolutely. So the double digits that you're seeing is a function of the risk that goes into repaying those loans.
So what constitutes that risk?
No, so that's why I'm saying that when you think about it, one change in government policy today can wipe out an industry.
Everything.
BDCs woke up one day and their licenses were invalid, they were shut down. So the entire thing is an ecosystem. And there are real factors there. But I love when you went into the real side. Uwa started to ask, or took part of my question away to say, what are the things that are the real sector? Your sector, for example, real estate. I hear the numbers that you people call for soil, for land, the soil, the sand and dirt, that you call. And I'm like, where do people find this money, right? We don't have a thriving mortgage system. We don't have let me not say thriving, we don't have an inclusive mortgage system. So when you talk about double digits, we're driving an industry that should be based on long-term funding. We're driving it on cash money. Like, that in itself must have an impact surely on the economy, because you are pricing the people who need mortgages out of the market. Because if I come today with my 200 million and I buy a house, ideally, the next time, that house maybe should not have gone for more than 150 million, and then somebody has a chance to buy with a mortgage. So this because you're in the real estate industry, I'm just going to put your industry on the spot a little bit. You guys are not helping the industry, or you're not helping the economy, or are you?
It still boils down to the environment, really. You spoke about the fact that I'm in the real estate industry, and we all know that is an issue with funding, right? But then we have the NHF, and I'm sure you're aware of the NHF, right? The National Housing Fund, which offers loans to individuals and corporates at 6%.
That is not open to everybody.
That's the problem. So it's not so much a problem of lack
Even
of...
with NHF, sorry to cut you. Even with NHF, a lot of it is still, the thing you are buying is still priced way above what
overpriced.
The NHF can give.
What Uti is even trying to say, let me say it in my laywoman English, because sometimes I don't understand how real estate, a place that is bush, there's no road to the place, and you call on a ridiculous amount of money.
Sorry.
Do you understand? Like, it is, so for me, I think, is a false economy. That you're in a bubble. In a lot of
the prices.
Do you understand who fixed these prices? Because let me tell you something.
God.
For me to buy a property abroad, it is the environment I'm paying for. I am paying for the infrastructure in that environment.
Yes.
Do you know, I'm paying for all of those things.
But we just pay for bush.
You just see a house like this. There's no water. You will even swim canoe.
What?
You go enter within the kayak.
You will
wait now. You will kayak there. You will kayak there. And somebody will now call you 100 million. I said,
like, really?
So tell me, I don't understand. And because again, if we want to solve this problem, a big issue that I know that affects a lot of pockets of Nigerians, this economic issue, is housing. Housing is one of the biggest problems a lot of people have.
Yes.
But, you know, because first of all, I have never seen where you pay upfront for something you've not even earned. You've not earned the money, and somebody's asking you for a year's rent and all of those kind of things. So if there was an opportunity, if I was earning a 300,000 naira salary and I had an opportunity to pay a 150,000 as down payment every month towards a property that I would eventually own, I would pick that option as opposed to paying rent. Do you understand? So we're not even getting it right in any of the sectors. And your sector is one of the biggest sectors that can actually change the trajectory of the economy.
Absolutely.
Because if people have taken that headache of housing off their necks, what do you think happens to the other economy? Business will thrive because they're no longer stressed to think of, oh, how do I put down one big money again for accommodation and all of that? Do you understand?
Yes.
So help me out.
I get you. I mean, it still boils down to the government. The government has a critical role to play in this space. Yeah, obviously, because now let's face it, the government controls, the law gives the government the power over property, over real estate in this country. Yes, because based on the Land Use Act, government owns all the land. As a matter of fact, individuals cannot really own land. You can only lease, you can only rent land from government for 99 years. That's what the COO gives you. That's the right it gives you. So the government is really the custodian and the owner of the land. So the government needs to find a way to create affordable real estate. How do they do that?
I don't understand. Is it the government that is putting the prices on the land?
No, I'll tell you why those prices are skyrocketing. It's because the government has so much land. They haven't released this land. They're not selling a lot of this land. They're keeping it, right? So the land that is now left to the privates to own and deal with, right? Those lands are few in number, right? But then the demand for those properties is high. And it's simple economics. When the demand is high and the supply is low, the prices will inevitably go up. So what the government needs to do is to ensure that it pushes the supply up to meet up with the demand, so that there's a bit of an equilibrium. That way prices will come down.
Okay, the land is finite.
Exactly.
You say that.
I don't agree with you. I don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
The land is the what they call it now. The square meter size of Nigeria is not about to change. So we are always, even at the size of our economy, supply will always outweigh demand. Even if you share it 1 square meter at a time. I don't know what the size of Nigeria is off the top of my head, but I hear you when you say that. But my question is, the government isn't setting the prices, right? And a land today that is 30 million, give it a few months, is 60 million. Please, what is driving that? I can understand if it is a house that is on the land. So I say, okay, as dollar is rising, as dollar is rising, right? Yeah. Cost of building materials are rising. So I can even understand and relate if it is a house. But this is dirt, soil, and like literally.
So let's go back. We're not yet to talk let's go back to the economics of the land.
That's the thing, because it's a key driver.
Yeah.
You talked when you said
actually.
You are talking about the economy. There are some industries that have boomed in recent times. The real estate industry didn't exist for me in the 80s. In the 80s, there was no agent, there was no anything. You want to rent a house, who you know.
Yeah, a chain.
So you are adding a lot of value. You have that industry employs everybody today is an agent. We had a situation in the green room where we're talking about securement fee. Yes, and somebody immediately walked up to us and said, I know an agent. So you are adding to the economy as an industry, no doubt. So let me segue, like Uwa said, back into the economy. The real sector is where we need to focus on. Entrepreneurship is the driver. Do we have, what was that thing that we had now? PEBEC and the ease of doing business. If you listen to the government today, they will tell you that we've done a lot. The vice president has done a lot of work. Maybe because I'm not an entrepreneur in my everyday life. Maybe that's why I'm not seeing the effects of it. But what else can we do today to really support the real sector? Because that's where we know the change is going to come
happen for the economy. And we have that in 1 minute or two.
What else can we do to support the real sector? I'll still go back to the issue of funding. It has to be, you have to provide them. I mean, maybe it's because I'm speaking from a point of where I am currently in my own space, because I know how much funding will help my business. Okay, so obviously that has to be done. But then even in terms of the efficiency in approving projects, for instance, just paperwork, documentation, and all of those things, that efficiency has to be improved upon. Okay, for instance, to build a house, right, you have to spend at least 3 to 4 to 5, sometimes 6 months just getting the building approval done. Meanwhile, you've already paid for the land. You've probably borrowed money to pay for that land. Your interest is counting, and your approval is sitting in someone's desk.
Expedite those systems.
So the systems, the structures, everything has to be efficient, and that's why I will keep saying that we need to get the private sector involved as much as possible, because the reality is that the government just doesn't have the level of efficiency or capacity to do these things. So get as much private guys to come in, consultants. Let them partner with the government. Let them try and ensure that they clean the system up and make things a lot more efficient. That way business will be a lot easier.
Oh yeah, let's take quickly comments, then we can run.
So I have Sule from Bauchi who says, Nigeria's GDP grew by 3.4%. We're doing better than any economy in the world. For the first time, we're investing in infrastructure that matters. Examples, the rail, the ports, and airports. Now you know my Nigeria went into recession. Remember, the refineries died under PDP, so we're making this political okay. The refinery in River State is coming up in the first quarter of 2023. With what is going on in the world, Nigerians would have died of hunger if not because of Buhari and the CBN. We see where this is going.
That's what you think?
No administration has invested in military equipment like this administration. Facts, okay. One of the enabling environments in the tax credits is the tax credits given to companies like Dangote, Glo, MTN, and NNPC to build roads.
Nani, quickly.
Good evening, my dear beautiful sisters of What Are You Saying? #ways. Concerning the Nigerian economy and the way forward, the economic system has been bad and terrible since last year during the time of COVID-19, and it has really affected jobs and businesses as a whole, and people could not even put food on the table. Like my dear beautiful sister Mani said, let's take for instance the Okada ban. The Okada man that you end up banning cannot make ends meet by feeding his family, and you make it difficult for him to even live up to expectations and be responsible. If you ban an Okada man and it is only source of livelihood, you must provide an alternative for him to survive, to feed his family. At least man must work. My name is Daniel Ilo.
So, in one word, do you see us coming out of this quickly as a way forward? When we do involve the private sector and focus on the what's it called, the non-oil sectors?
Can I not answer this in one word? Because I think it's always impossible.
Yeah.
But I think it has to be a combination of the political issues and the economic. So they are two different things, and I try not to mix them up most times. So you have the political side, which is obviously leadership. Once you can solve that, issues around corruption, for instance, will be solved. Okay, issues around efficiency in the way they do things will be solved. So that's by the side. But then the economics of things, you have infrastructure has to be in place, because that's where everything sort of springs up from, right? But beyond that, one major problem we have in this country is our tax. Tax to GDP is one of the lowest globally, and a lot of people don't talk about this enough.
Imagine if we start to tax.
Yes, because remember that what we have in this country is not so much a debt problem. People talk about our debt being so high, right?
It is the collection of the revenue.
This is the revenue.
Revenue.
It's the revenue. Our debt to GDP is not so high compared to other countries. What is high is our debt to revenue ratio. So we need to increase our revenues.
Absolutely.
Now, and I'm not saying we should increase tax rates, please, before anybody comes and starts throwing stones at me.
We are running out of tax
because they don't.
Before we go, thank you so much, Bamidele. Thank you, Manny. Thank you, Uti. Now, before we go, ensure you follow us on Instagram at PlusTvAfrica1 with the #PlusShow. You can interact with us further, drop a comment, and more importantly, follow all our engagements on social media. Like, share, invite your families and friends to watch and follow the conversation. If you missed today's quote, here it is again. It's simple. Good government is one of the most important factors in economic growth and social well-being. I think it's very self-explanatory. We'll see you guys live on Monday at 8 p.m. as we bring another great conversation to your screen. Enjoy.